Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream. My name is Marta. I'm all about practical creativity, and today we're going to talk more about the practical side than the creative side because we're talking about grants. And what I'm expecting is that this will be primarily a stream of me here on Instagram with everybody. Sorry for the bad angle. So we're going to switch it up and just do kind of like teaching style today. So what are grants and why do they matter? Why are they important? And why is grant writing a skill that is applicable and helpful for you and for anyone? First of all, there are a lot of grants available right now, and some loans that kind of look like grants depending on where you're looking. If you're a nonprofit, you have access to grants. And then if you're a small business, there are some COVID programs right now that are designed for helping small businesses. So really what that looks like is a form and something that's all about, it will ask you to complete a bunch of questions about your organization. So I don't want to talk too much about small business loans. A lot of you are actually completing those online, which is great, working with your banks and all of that stuff. So I'm not going to cover that. I'm mainly going to cover what does it take to be successful in writing a grant. Okay, first thing, a grant is a way that a funder can learn about you and fund you. So a lot of foundations, so there are a couple different kinds of grants. There's institutional grants, which are the typical kind. There are also family foundations, which are private foundations. The Knight Foundation is a private funder, as well as there are other local ones here and ones across the country as well. So every foundation pretty much that is bigger than just a family will have a special process that you go through in order to see if you apply for grants. And because funders are private, they get to decide what their priorities are. So for instance, I just happen to know a lot about the Knight Foundation, and you know, they fund journalism, they fund the arts, and they fund community initiatives. I'm sure there's a lot more that is a lot more detailed than that you can check out on their website. But those are the basics. So every foundation, every private funder is going to have their own priorities. So it's really important when you start looking for grants to realize that you can actually quickly find out whether you apply or whether you're not eligible. So every foundation will generally have some sort of set of requirements that you'll have to pass. Okay, there are also corporations that offer grants as part of their community social responsibility programs. So those look like grants and they come across that same way, but some of them may have some requirements such as logos and that type of thing. So private foundations also often want you to use their logos, and you will be in conversation with them in order to figure out how is the best way to recognize your donors. So first of all is the application, and then we can talk about what it actually takes to fulfill the grant or the sponsorship, and then how you recognize your donors. First of all, my general advice is that when you are working with funders, no matter who they are, even if they're institutional funders, which is, just to recap, institutional funders are foundations, corporations, and government. So government has its own set of things, and organizations or governments like the Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs are extremely generous, and they have an amazing team of staff who are very, very helpful in helping you learn how to create your application and complete it for the very first time. They also have different levels of different levels of grants depending on how big your organization is, what its function is, the kind of programs that you do, etc. I do want to talk about artists as well. So artists are more likely to be finding government grants. The National Endowment for the Arts has funded individual artists for a really long time. And also they're more likely to get foundation grants. There are other kinds of new types of funding programs that give artists and organizations money, but I'm not going to talk about those today. So if you're an artist, let's just start there, because I think it's probably the easiest thing to do. So I'm going to share my screen here so that you can see what I'm seeing. And I'm going to move this over and show you where I start when I'm looking for a grant. So let's assume that I am an artist and I'm looking for a grant. So I'm just going to choose the Harpo Foundation. Harpo Foundation is a foundation that gives grants for visual artists. So let's go to their website, because the first step in really learning whether you're going to be funded or not is looking at prospecting. Prospecting is who are the organizations or who are the funders that you're looking at to actually get funding from. So funders, again, have their own things that they stand for. So when you go to Harpo Foundation, here it's very clear, grant for visual artists. So if you're musicians, probably not for you. So that's a key to you immediately. They have a nice big button here on online application right here. And here is something very, very clear. The award provides direct support to under-recognized artists 21 years or older. So if you're 20, you don't apply. They're also being very generous. Heads up, visual artists, if you're looking for grant opportunities, they have extended the grant cycle application date to May 1st. So you still have a couple of weeks. If you have not yet applied and you're interested, you're 21 and older, under-recognized artists. Many artist applications will require a fee, and that's just a process on the back end for usually having the portal open. There is a fee that the organizations are carrying in order to do that. So if you're an artist, you're probably used to applying for things and paying a fee anyhow. So there it is. Fees are applied to grant administration, program development. So artist applications are very simple. They need resumes generally. They need an artist statement, which is like, what is your purpose? And then they also want to see your work. So the whole point of any grant is it is a way to establish your reputation. It is a way to build legitimacy for you as a person or as an organization that is eligible, that could be considered worthy of receiving funding. So for an artist, they want to know, what have you done? What do you stand for? Which is kind of like your mission statement, right? Except it's about your work. And then they want to see your work itself. So again, here's more about the eligibility, under self-defined, under-recognized. So they're not going to define that for you. You can define it. You have to be a US citizen. You can't be a current student. You can't have received a grant from them before. And then those who have gotten an organizational grant are eligible. So again, your funder is going to have very different requirements depending on who they are. Let's go over here, and here they tell you more about how the awards are decided and when the decisions are made. They also say, this is very important, if you're a visual artist and you're applying for this, you will be required to give them a report as to how you use the money. So be aware of that and start to think ahead of time. I think one of the things that really helps any application is an existing relationship. So funding is really about partnership, and funding is really also about a relationship. So it's kind of like dating. People talk about dating when they talk about funding. And so that just basically means if somebody is going to give you money, it's because they know you well enough, or you've established yourself in their process well enough to actually establish that legitimacy we were talking about a minute ago. And then the relationship continues. So if you apply and you start to get to know the program officer, it's great whether or not you've gotten the grant to stay in touch with them. Oftentimes, if you don't get a grant, grantors will be very open to giving you some sort of feedback. It's not universally applicable, but a lot of them really do want people to get money. So in the first or second day that we were doing these live streams, there really are people who want to give you money, and they have no reason not to do it. But it's not just about the money, it's about that relationship. So the more they can get to know you, including like how you can be better positioned to get the money if you haven't gotten it the first time around. Again, you can never go wrong if you look at this like people you want to cultivate a friendship with or a relationship with. Okay, so that's kind of where I'm going to stop for visual artists. I want to focus on now other kinds of things. Let's go over to this one. This, again, this is called the We Are All Music Foundation. I've never heard of this foundation, but it's clear that the word impactful nonprofit organization. So this is for nonprofits and that use the power of music to improve lives. So again, it's very clear what their priorities are, and they actually have a video here. This is not a typical kind of foundation thing. This seems very hip and very cool. Here, they're gonna tell you more about their priorities. So you can kind of get a feeling for whether your organization, oh, look at that. You can get more information as you float over the different areas here. But again, they're telling you, here's what we're about, et cetera, et cetera. They have 3 big priorities. You can learn more, which I've been on this page slightly before, and that doesn't take you to where to apply. So let's go there, which is apply for funding. All right, and to apply, okay, here are some of those requirements we talked about. Also information that is super helpful, which is the larger side of their funding is 30 to 40,000. The smaller range is 2,000 to 10,000. So one of the things that you want to do when you're building a relationship with somebody is to know what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So for instance, just to make it relevant and tangible, if you were going out with a person you didn't know and you didn't really know about them, it would be, and again, this is in normal times, not in times of COVID, it would be good to know enough about them to know if that person is going to ask you to suggest a place to meet, that you know whether you're going to Peter Luger Steakhouse or whether you're going to Wendy's, right? So it's helpful to just kind of have an idea of like, how much is the pot of funding that I could possibly be eligible for. I think that there's another foundation that says, we don't give anything above 5,000 and we're really picky about it. So you just get to know the particulars of your funder in this way. So here again, application has been designed to require minimal time. That's always a win, right? So you have to be 501c3. That means that you're a registered not-for-profit tax-exempt organization registered with the IRS. That is a whole process. If you don't have a 501c3, it's possible sometimes to use a fiscal agent, an organization that is willing to kind of donate you the use of their 501c3 status. But this looks like for this funder, you have to have the 501c3 yourself. So music must be core to your mission. Financial audits are 990s the last 3 years. This is not very uncommon. And the whole idea is an audited, to have financially audited statements means that you have an outside accounting firm come in and look at your books every day and to give an opinion, say these are clean, these are not clean. They have notes saying here's an area that's of concern. It's basically looking into how you're running your business and whether you are adhering to basic accounting principles and doing legitimate, again, a grant is about legitimacy, whether you are doing business that is ethical, essentially. They also want to know you have a website and established bylaws. Now, most of the time you need bylaws in order to file for 501c3 as part of the process. So you probably should already have those. You will also have articles of incorporation. Sometimes funders ask for those. So let's go over here now to a third example on the organization side, which is the Coral Gables Community Foundation. So again, here we are, this is community giving. This has a little bit about their background, their mission, their application. Every grant, here's the process, here's who does the process, and then grants don't typically exceed 5,000. So I don't know if you on Instagram can see that, But basically, here are the submission deadlines. A lot of times these are not deadlines that are soft. These are hard deadlines. So make sure that you apply in plenty of time. And it does take, like Pioneer Winter was saying on our stream early on, it does take probably between 3 to 10 hours just to put one of these together. And that's not because there's a lot of heavy writing. It's usually because it requires you to be very organized. So here, Coral Gables Community Foundation, they don't fund sectarian or religious activities, political activities. They don't do individuals, so an individual artist would not be eligible. And then anything else, so no galas, and then organizations operating outside the United States. Here are the guidelines. You have to be 501c3 again, or here they say it's okay if you have a fiscal agent. And then you must apply for a project that addresses their priorities, which are education, arts and culture, historic preservation, and or social and health services. The project must be relevant to Coral Gables. That makes sense because it's the Coral Gables Community Foundation. And then it goes through the application process. This is very, very standard. And the reason that I wanted to throw this over to you all and here is actually where their grant submission is. You can download the forms and then you fill in the bubbles and then you include the attachments. So I'm gonna stop sharing now and just go back to the full screen to talk about what is a grant anyway. So a grant allows you to communicate, number one, who you are, number two, why you're doing what you do that aligns with what they're doing and what they want to solve. Again, they have their own priorities. And then number three is the how, which is like, what are the details of how you're actually going to go about solving that problem? So you have a narrative. The narrative is your time and your place to tell a story. This is where you build trust, you position yourself as a leader, and you get to talk a little bit about your track record. What you want to do with a grant is make it absolutely irresistible that you are the right answer because you have the right program, you have the right team, and you can prove it. This is the part that I see so many people forgetting. If you can't prove it, and you're not thinking that the people on the other end of this won't want to show impact, you're going about it wrong. So just like you would be pitching to an investor, if you're an entrepreneur and you're pitching to an investor, they're going to want to know, what's my return on investment? Just because not-for-profit funding agents or foundations, governments, and corporations are giving you money and you're a nonprofit does not mean that they don't want to see impact. So if you're not thinking about your impact and how you're going to prove it at the end, you are already starting at a disadvantage. So let me just walk you through. And also, we haven't talked about researching, but researching grants is like a whole other thing. There are a lot of free resources and there are a lot of paid resources that you can actually access for free by going to places like your public library. So I know that downtown, the public library, you can actually access the Foundation Center's database, which I think is called something else right now. I'll probably put that in the comments, but you have access to resources even if you don't have a big infrastructure and therefore have a $2,000 annual subscription fee that you're willing to pay for access to that thing. There are a lot of partners also who will help you and allow you to access their resources for free. We are all in this together, and a lot of times when you're working with partners, they kind of complement you, but they're not necessarily doing exactly what you do. So a lot of them will work with you on that. So first thing is research. You want to know, are you eligible? Do you qualify? What do they care about? What's their average gift? One other thing to look at is like, who else has been funded by them? Who else have they chosen as kind of like the gold standard? And when somebody's funding you, it's because they think you're the gold standard of whatever you do. And then are there any restrictions on the way that you can use the money? So for instance, there are, I think the county will not allow you to, they require a match. This is another thing to be aware of. Some funders, like the Night Arts Challenge, require a match. And what does that mean? A match means that if they give you $25,000, you have to bring in another $25,000 from another source in order to make it a $50,000 budget. So if you get $25,000 and $25,000 and an extra $10,000, that's even better. But essentially matching gifts are a way that funders can come together to have bigger impact than they could on their own. And also make sure that you're being successful by suggesting that you leverage their gift to bring in other money. So that's a tactic that is often really, really powerful. So the basics of your actual application, they're gonna ask you to do a couple of things. Part one is like just details. Like what's your employee number? What's your, employer number, your EIN? What is your tax affiliated number with the IRS? It has a dash in it, 2 numbers, a dash, and then a couple other numbers. They're gonna wanna know the date of incorporation. If you're a 501c3 nonprofit, you will have your articles of incorporation, and you will also have your tax exemption letter from the IRS that I mentioned before. They're also going to know your website. One of the funders we looked at already today wanted to know your website. Some of them will ask you your social media channels. If you don't have social media channels, it doesn't mean you're off the table, but a lot of funders, again, want you to help them tell the story of their own program and their own impact. So they may be looking for how you are also recognizing your other donors. Are you talking about your donors on social media? At least maybe not individuals, and it's not always appropriate, but definitely your institutional funders, the ones where you go to a website and you see logo, 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 those are the folks that care about visibility. Another thing they're gonna ask you is your mission. So if you are 501c3, you're gonna have your mission somewhere. So that's something keep handy. And what I do when I'm doing grants is I create a big, long running Google Doc that is called boilerplate. And this is kind of an industrial way of looking at grant making or grant writing. But the idea is you put all of the verbiage you've ever written for different aspects of your programs in one place so that it can live there, and you don't have to keep hunting for that language every time you write a grant. Because if you do one thing, you might have 3 programs that address how you do that thing. Some grant programs will only want this program. They don't want the rest of the things. And as you grow and develop your programming, maybe you have something like a new initiative that is more focused on wellness. So if you're applying for a wellness grant, they're not gonna care necessarily about the other stuff. Okay, they are also gonna ask you about your history. So this is just a way for them to understand. Oh, Isa says it's called the Foundation Directory. Foundation Directory Online, that's absolutely it. Thank you, Isa. She was on Instagram here. Thank you, that's awesome. This is a great conversation. Great to have feedback from the other side. So your achievements and your history are a way that you, again, prove legitimacy, that you show people you've been around the block, you are appropriately positioned to do the work that you're doing, that you have enough gravitas, you have enough experience, you have enough legitimacy. Okay, and then you're going to be asked for a bunch of uploads. So just like we had the artist on the artist side, the resume, which is really the background, right? The artist statement, which is like the mission, and then work samples. So there are a lot more work samples that go into an organizational application than for an artist application. These include, and some of them are just basics, that they're doing their due diligence, because governments are accountable to people, to the citizens of the places where they are. That's local, national, and local, state, and national governments. All of them usually have some sort of arts funding designated or culture funding. And a whole bunch of other things, but I'm most familiar with arts and culture. So they're gonna ask you IRS exemption letter, your 501c3, that's the 501c3 letter, articles of incorporation, audited statements, we talked about that already. They're also likely gonna wanna know about your organization. You'll probably have to answer questions about number of staff members, etc. So an organization chart is a great visual to have to be able to show people the way that you function, the way that you structure, especially if there are different programs, kind of who is overseeing. It just adds a layer of color that is really helpful. And if you don't have one, and you even a one-person organization, it's really helpful to be able to show people what are the areas that that person oversees. You'll also be asked for sometimes an annual report, which is just a compendium of whatever happens programmatically, donation-wise, what were your big wins, what were your big achievements year on year. And so for last fiscal year, if you don't have an annual report, there are a lot of great recommendations, a lot of great organizations. Just go on Google and snoop your favorite organizations and see what their annual reports look like. Very different based on how big a company is. And it's actually, a lot of times it is a financial snapshot as well as testimonials and photographs. Photos are so, so, so important. Another thing you might be asked to upload is a logic model or a theory of change. And some granting organizations, when you go in to fill in a grant online, they'll actually ask you to populate a theory of change. And this essentially says, what is it that you're setting out to do? What's your big problem? How are you going about doing that? And then what are the results over time? So over time from doing your mission, what does the achievement of that look like? And what does that actually mean in terms of the way that the community is? Or if you're social justice oriented, how will that be a win for community impact and making things more equitable, or whatever it is that you're all about? What else? So basics about the narrative. The narrative is the part where you really get into the nitty-gritty. So in order to be really organized, number one rule with grants, be really, really organized. Because if not, it's kind of like you're just pinging from here to there, trying to find and identify information. So best thing is go through the request for proposal or go through the proposal itself. All of the questions in your own document. I use Google Docs. So I put down all of the questions that I'm going to be asked to answer. And I just start brainstorming, where does my organization fit in? I actually wrote out some questions, which is, as you're going through each question, think about, what do they care about? Where do I align? What programs make sense to feature based on what they care about and where we align? And then how can you prove that? So already have that top of mind when you create your narrative, because that's going to create the most compelling story. When you're writing a grant, you're telling a story. You're telling a story of impact. You're telling a story of actually what is going to happen as a result of them investing in you. So again, Google Documents, go through the notes, take your own notes based on those 4 things, and then the narrative itself. If you don't have the answers, where can you find them? Where are they going to be? Even if going through, you're like, I have that in this folder, just so that way you can, again, stay organized. Number one rule. What is the problem you're solving? There's always a question like this on every grant application. So this is what the funder cares about most. What is the problem that you're solving that aligns with their value or that aligns with what they are prioritizing with their funding? Then you want to look at who has the data to support that this problem exists. And third is who has the data to support that the way you're going about things is the right way. So one of the things that I see when I'm looking at grants is common mistake, probably number one mistake. People think that they can just write boring copy and not have anything that stands out as factual. Number one mistake. So you're telling a story, tell a story. Use words that are exciting. Use words that show, don't tell. This is probably the best thing you could possibly do in a grant, show, don't tell. And that means citing research. You can Google all sorts of things and find research to support pretty much anything. So, and a lot of them come from universities. So take some time and comb through that. It also helps legitimize that your approach is being validated, or that this problem really is a big problem and maybe people hadn't realized that. But if you cite a Yale University study, maybe that has an impact it wouldn't if you were just saying, here's what the problem is. So add legitimacy any layer you possibly can. Include statistics. If you're not tracking your programs over time and being really diligent about keeping track of the number of people you're serving, who they are, what are their special attributes. Sometimes it might be where they live. Sometimes it might be their age. Sometimes it might be their ethnicity or their racial group. It might also be Stories. So stories, again, add color. If you have an anecdote saying, you know, we serve people who live in violent areas. We actually lost a child to gun violence. That tells a lot different story than it does just something in the abstract, even something supported by facts. So it's good to include both if you can. The most challenging thing about grants is that they have a limited number of characters that you can use. So pretty much you're going to get really good at making the most concise version of your story. And that will be very compelling and that will be very useful. Sometimes when you start to do this kind of grant writing work, you'll also get clear on how to talk about your organization. I know we were visiting with Mark Fest last week, really talking about elevator pitch, which is all about how to communicate in a short amount of time, something very compelling. So all of these things can cross-pollinate. Just because you're writing grant copy doesn't mean you can't bring that out next time you're talking to somebody in public about the impact of your organization. So it's also good to be in touch with your people who are doing all of these things if it's not just you. So therefore you can, and yes, this video will be on my YouTube page. This will be on my Facebook page for anyone who has to jump off. I know I'm going a little bit long, but I wanted to do a thorough job in talking about grants. So audience, who does this benefit? And again, keep records. It's so important to track. Who are you serving? And those demographics, those numbers, numbers of participation, if you have an evaluation plan, which is next, being able to prove your impact over time, that this was money well spent, only will help you get, number one, better at your own organizational processes and being able to document and anticipate, or anticipate and then document what the impact is of your work. It will also help you be able to tell that story in a continuing way. So the more you have that helps you prove your impact, the better you're going to look to funders and the better you're going to be on the organizational side and being disciplined about the things that you know will help you tell that story. Sometimes the best grants, and I've been on a lot of grant panels, and you really see a range of, number one, the way people tackle grants, and number two, how compellingly they actually share about the program. I've also gone to site visits and seen that some of the ways that people write grants and then the programs are actually less quality than they sound, which means they're telling a really good story, even if the quality is not great. But you could have an amazing program that the story is just not told very well, and therefore the impact is not as great. So make sure that you're checking yourself for how compelling is this. You don't want it to be boring. If it's boring, you're done, okay? There's so many people who are reviewing these, they really want to be told a story. And if you can do that with stories and with statistics and numbers, research, and then photographs, that's gonna really put you into a different kind of category in the way that the grants panelists are seeing you. Yeah, Kavya. So last thing here, performance monitoring tools and methods. So they're going to want to know, how are you going to go about knowing whether this program is effective or not? And if you're doing something with, say, youth, they're going to want to know, like, how are you planning to capture data? And then what will that data mean as to whether you're successful or not? So tell us in advance, 80% of your people are going to feel more confident, they're going to do better in school, and they're going to have progressed in their artistic program. They want to know that concretely, like, what are your statistics and what are your goals? What does success look like? So that's where you get to prove that. And then in your final report, you get to report back saying, it wasn't just 80%, it was 96%. We are killing it over here. We're ready for more money, or whatever it is. Essentially, your final report will be where you come back and you report according to your framework that you set out in your measures. So if you're not evaluating, that's not going to look very good. And number two, it's an opportunity to really prove what you've done that's been really successful. Okay, last things that they're going to ask for. Who's your team? Why are they the right people? Sometimes this is just bios, show us bios. Other times they're going to want more of a rationale. Financial narrative, they're going to want to know about, where is other money coming from? If there's a match, where's the match coming from? Is it committed? Is it pending? Do you have multi-year funding, or is everything kind of very loose and $2,000 grants here and there? They're also going to want to see that you're showing fiscal responsibility in the way that you're handling your grants. So if you have won a big contract, they're going to want to know about that. Also, if your board is giving, this is a great way to showcase that your board is 100% giving if that is one of your requirements. That's something that, again, helps establish legitimacy. These people are doing due diligence. They're making sure that the people who have signed on to be fiscally responsible are also being funders to the organization. It just instills a different level of confidence. Two kinds of budgets. The program budget, which is just about what the grant you're creating is all about. So it's probably not your whole organization, it's probably just that program, but they will want to see the bigger picture. So you probably have to do the program budget as well as the organizational budget. They're also usually now talking about sustainability and organizational capacity, which is what is your professional development plan for your organization? What is your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion? How are you going about that? How are you holding yourself and your board accountable for that kind of work? And sometimes they will ask you about who's your competition, who else is doing similar work. Another thing I forgot to mention earlier is there is very little that is done alone. So almost every grant now also asks about partners. And your partner doesn't have to do exactly what you do and the way you do it, but they could be complementary partners. So for instance, if you're working in a school that also has after-school program that brings wraparound services. So maybe that's mental health support, maybe that's meals, maybe that's some other sort of support. Oftentimes you're gonna work with mission-aligned partners where like you fill a gap that they have, they fill a gap that you have, and you may not be having any sort of financial exchange, but you are helping to serve your population deeper because of that partnership. And that is so, so, so important because again, funders are looking at how their investment can be leveraged. And if you're working with other people, if you're working in the schools, you are, or whatever, whoever you're partnering with, you're having a bigger impact than just you on your own serving those folks. So that's pretty much it. Grants 101, what do artist applications look like? What do organization applications look like? And what are the best practices? So to recap, the grant is what is the problem? Why is the problem maybe? How are you solving it? And who are you serving? You want to build trust. You want to position yourself as a leader. You want to instill confidence that you're doing a good job and that you're accountable, that you have a track record. And last, you want to make it an actual conversation. You want to make it story driven. You can use numbers, but make sure there's a story there. Uploads can do a lot. So all of the uploads that we talked about, work samples, organizations, they're going to ask you for work samples as well. If you have particularly compelling social media posts or you have videos, think about before you start, how can you be proving the impact and how can you be shining the light on other partners and other kinds of funders and money that you're getting. You want to be so irresistible that there's no question you're going to get funding. So if you have questions, feel free to hit me up directly. I'm here to help. I've written probably 200 grants by now, so I'm very familiar with the process. If you have a question about approach or even how to get started, I'm here to help. And it's been great talking to you today. I will see you tomorrow, and thanks for joining. Oh, to get to me, I should probably tell you that. You can email me at info@culturedinnovations.com, or you can DM me on my Facebook page, DM me on my Instagram, or I think on my website, you can now actually set up a one-to-one meeting if you feel like you'd like to just Zoom or talk on the phone. So that's it. I'll see you here tomorrow. Bye.